I'm Nate,
And I'm Rob.
and this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. Today we are going to talk about the 2019 release Joker, directed by Todd Phillips. Todd Phillips is principally known as a comedy director. He's best known for the Hangover films and the movie Due Date. So he's worked with Zach Galifianakis a lot. So doing a film that's both kind of an art house, gritty drama, and a superhero film, in a sense, at the same time, seems a little out of character for him. Who was the guy that did the Big Short and Dick?
And Adam McKay.
Adam McKay, yes. So he's another guy that came from the comedy realm and branched out. I mean, his films still have one foot in the world of comedy more than this film does.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably easier for a comedy director to move over into drama and more serious works than it is for a dramatic director to move to comedy. They say the same thing about actors.
Yeah.
You see a lot of serious actors transition, or comic actors rather, transition into serious films like Tom Hanks, probably the best known example. But you don't see a lot of the reverse. Anyway, I don't really know much of Todd Phillips' work. I've seen Due Date, but I haven't seen any of the Hangover films.
I saw the first Hangover, and it's a type of comedy that's not my favorite.
Yeah.
It really surprised me. You know, I knew the name Todd Phillips when I saw his name as the director. I couldn't, off the top of my head, I couldn't associate what he'd done, like, anything with his name. And so when I looked at his filmography, I was kind of like,
really? Yeah.
why did they pick this guy?
No, I think this was kind of his idea. I believe he co-wrote the screenplay. This, of course, is an adaptation or an origin story for the comic book character, the Joker. It's doing some interesting things with tone and some things they do with setting on this film. It is a period piece. It chronicles the Joker becoming the Joker. His name in this film is Arthur Flick, and he is played by Joaquin Phoenix. He is a man with some mental problems who lives with his mother in public housing in Gotham City, which is basically New York. In 1981, the film starts during a garbage strike. The city is kind of a pressure keg, powder keg, waiting to go off. The economy is bad. Crime is bad. City services are being cut. And there's just a lot of stress going on in the community, which eventually erupts, and somebody who kind of focuses that eruption is Arthur, who basically experiences a slow breakdown and copes with it by adopting the Joker persona and inflicting death, inflicting chaos, and being adopted. And he didn't really set out to do this, but he ends up being kind of adopted as this symbol of frustration. There's certain parallels to both Occupy Wall Street and also political disillusionment with the elites on the right. So even though it's a period piece, it has things to say about current political issues. This film was very much intended to be an homage to the films of Martin Scorsese, particularly, and films generally from the 70s and into the early 80s. The film is set in 1981. It doesn't give you like one of those date drops at the bottom of the screen or anything, but you can piece it together based on the look of the thing. And one of the very last scenes in the film, some characters are exiting a theater, and you can see the movie posters that are up there, which are all 1981 releases. Blowout, which was a John Travolta film, the comedy Arthur, Excalibur, which was a family or fantasy film, and I believe I saw part of the poster for An American Werewolf in London. So all 1981 releases. I also think the selection of 1981 as the year to set the film, of course, plays into this was a period where Scorsese was making these gritty films. But there's a film from 2014 called A Most Violent Year. And it is about competition, very brutal competition, and even some criminal and mob-related activity among the heating oil industry in New York in the year 1981, which apparently was the year in which the murder rate in New York peaked. So I think that might have been an homage. There's a radio thing you hear in the background at one point where they talk about heating oil shortages. So it is quite the film. It's sometimes hard to even know where to begin with this one. But this was my second time seeing it. I saw it the first time about 2 months ago. Rob, this would be your first time seeing it.
and I'm late coming to the party. It's one I wanted to see for a little while, just hadn't gotten around to seeing it. Just kind of a fluke thing that we ended up seeing it today, but
Yeah, I had been aware of this film for some time before it came out, hearing about how it was a Joker origin story that was channeling Martin Scorsese. Scorsese was at one point involved in a executive producer or producer capacity, but he later backed out of it and has since said some things about specifically Marvel movies, but just kind of modern blockbusters in general. This film is a weird hybrid between a more serious Scorsese-type film and a comic book movie. In fact, I wonder to a certain extent if it might have worked better for me had they cut the Joker out of it and just told the story of this character's mental unraveling. But you would have had a hard time selling that movie and getting the big names that they got if this was just a standalone homage film. But anyway, Rob, going into the film, what were your expectations? How did you first become aware of the film?
well, like you, I saw a lot of the promotion coming up to it. I'm actually really kind of surprised that it took me this long to see this movie. I was excited for it to come out. I watched it, the trailers. When a trailer would drop, I'd go watch it. So I'm really surprised it took me this long to get around to watching it. Just kind of a combination of circumstances that it took me this long. But I was well aware of this film. I really like the Joker character as done by Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
And so I was, from that affiliation, I was kind of excited for it. Joaquin Phoenix, I don't like every role he's done, but you have to give the guy credit. When he does a role, he commits.
Yeah, he does. I mean, there are certain scenes in this film where they show how skinny Arthur is, and Joaquin Phoenix would have had to have lost a significant amount of weight. This was not special effects ribs we're seeing. We're seeing his ribs. And he's skin and bones in this movie.
He's just very committed to it. I was kind of curious to see, when I heard that Joaquin Phoenix was going to play the Joker, I was excited. If you were going to do it, kind of backing up a little bit, the
Suicide Squad with Jared Leto.
I did not like that portrayal of the Joker.
A lot of people were disappointed with Jared Leto's Joker. I think Jared Leto was disappointed with Jared Leto's Joker.
I think it was too soon. I don't think it did the role any credit. Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker, that's going to go down as a role. That's one of the, in my opinion, that's one of the all-time great performances.
This Joker is really the closest to it in terms of any real competition for the best performance. Cesar Romero's kind of campy performance in the 60s was iconic, and Jack Nicholson did a heck of a good Joker.
Jack Nicholson did a great one. In fact, when you heard that The Dark Knight was going to have the Joker in it, you were kind of, do we really need to revisit Jack Nicholson's Joker? Mm-hmm. When I heard the Joker was going to be in it, I was kind of like, do we really need to revisit Jack Nicholson's Joker role, or is that not the iconic Jack Nicholson,
top that?
Joker role? And then you watched Heath Ledger do that performance. Obviously we have seen what it did to Heath Ledger and what happened afterwards, the aftermath, but Heath Ledger's performance was amazing, and Heath Ledger was a great actor. And I don't know much about Jared Leto, but just the nature of the way they went about that role in Suicide Squad, I just wasn't a fan.
Yeah, I didn't love it. The one thing I really appreciated, he's hurt by comparison to previous Jokers. One thing I did appreciate about it is that they went in a really different direction.
Yeah.
They were basically just making him a gangster.
Yeah.
Which was kind of fresh because it had been a long time since you'd seen that.
So, but then when I heard Joaquin Phoenix was going to be the star role in the Joker movie, I was like, okay, this is taking this down a similar road to where I think Heath Ledger was. I'm interested to see this. And so I followed it all along. And like I said, I'm really surprised it took me this long to actually go and see it. This is a beautifully dark movie.
Yeah. I love the look of this movie. Again, it's period piece. We were discussing earlier how we appreciated that they didn't CGI this thing. They used actual sets, some of which were pretty large. They had sections of street mocked up to look like basically 1981 New York City, which is essentially what Gotham City is a stand-in for.
Yeah.
And it's gritty and it's sturdy, and there's a trash strike going on. My father actually, I think he might have been to New York twice. I know when I was very, very young, him and my mom went to New Jersey. He almost took a job out there.
Oh, yeah.
And they went out for the interview. And then when he was in his late teens, his older brother Andrew served a mission in New York, and the family took the station wagon cross country to pick him up. And he said that when he went to New York City, and this would have been circa 1968, there was a garbage strike happening. So that's kind of what he
Yeah.
associated the city with. So one thing that intrigued me about this film from the start was the association with Martin Scorsese. There's two films of his which this movie very intentionally nods to and homages and borrows from, and that's, of course, Taxi Driver, which is the film that really made Scorsese a star director. It's a 1976 film starring Robert De Niro, who, of course, shows up in this film as a very Johnny Carson-like talk show host. They went all out with the Johnny Carson thing. I mean, the curtains, the Ed McMahon look-alike as the co-host. I mean, this was they weren't soft-serving this likening. So this film homages that, which is about a Vietnam War veteran, becomes a taxi driver. He's disturbed. He's not right in the head, and he becomes a vigilante. Mm-hmm. And then a film from the early 80s called King of Comedy that also stars De Niro about another mentally unbalanced man who aspires to be a stand-up comedian. And in order to get on TV, he kidnaps a late-night talk show host, in this case played by Jerry Lewis. There's also certain elements of the film that remind me of other films, principally of the 70s. Network, you can definitely see the influence of Network on this film. There's a film whose title I'm forgetting. I think it might be from the very late 60s. It had Ed McMahon in it, and he didn't do very many acting jobs. It also had very young Martin Sheen in it, which was about a number of people kept hostage by some youths on a subway train in New York City. And there's a couple scenes in this film on subways that evoked that to one extent or another. So when it comes to films that are evoking earlier films, that can be a hit and miss prospect. I think this Joker movie is a good movie, but I couldn't get over the films that it was reminded me of, which I think are better films and obviously are more original films. So when a film reminds you of better films, it only hurts the film. Now, there are times in which a strong homage works, and an example we were talking about earlier was what was probably my first or second favorite film of last year, which was First Reformed.
Yeah.
And about the first half of First Reformed is pretty close to the beginning of a film by Bergman from the early 60s called Winter Light, which is about in this case, Lutheran priest living in rural Sweden who's having a faith crisis after the death of his wife. And First Reformed is about they never really say what denomination he's in, a priest who is grieving from the breakup of his marriage as a result of the death of his son in the Iraq War. And that film also homages Taxi Driver in a way that I won't want to get into to not, well, if you've heard anything about Taxi Driver, you have a sense of kind of where this film would be going. But it also references Diary of a Country Priest and a number of other religious films. And I just found the synthesis there in that film really added on top of the things that it was homaging. And I don't really feel like Joker did. I don't think it was as effective. And in fact, I wonder if removing the Joker character from this film and just making it a film about Arthur's breakdown might have worked better for me.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, I don't remember if it's actually in this recording or not, but you mentioned how would you market that?
Yeah, it would be hard to market. It would be hard to get the caliber of stars that this film got. It would be hard to sell it.
Well, and I think that Arthur Fleck role only works the way it does because he becomes the Joker.
And
I mean,
if know where it's going the whole time.
To some extent, but I mean, if it was just about the Arthur Fleck and he doesn't become the Joker, that's just a really depressing film.
Yeah. Mm.
I don't even know that it would do that well because that would just... I mean, this film's so dark, it's kind of depressing anyway.
Well, knowing that it's the Joker origin story gives it a certain kind of structure to latch onto when you're watching the film and a filter through which to see it. So that you're expecting a version of how this movie ultimately ends.
Well, and we mentioned, as we walked out of the theater, we kind of, we were having a little bit of a conversation, mostly just me trying to process this film and kind of formulate my thoughts on it. I think they could have ended this a little bit better than they did. I mean, this film is extremely strong, but there's a couple, I only have a few minor complaints about it, and I think that they could have ended it slightly better. There's something that they hint at repeatedly throughout the movie that never comes to fruition, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about it later.
Yeah, you go ahead and remind me that there's going to be spoilers. We're
going to contain spoilers in our discussion.
Not safe if you haven't seen it before and you want to come in fresh.
Yeah, if you don't mind spoilers, keep listening. If you don't mind spoilers and haven't seen this, and don't mind the spoilers, then go ahead and keep listening. You'll kind of have an idea of where this goes. Not the very ending scene, but near the end of the movie, Arthur Fleck gets invited onto, what was the night show?
Murray Franklin.
Live
with Murray Franklin.
Live with Murray Franklin.
Murray Franklin is played by Robert De Niro.
And he gets invited to come on the show, and he thinks this is his arrival, this is his moment, and he's going through his mental breakdown at the same time as the lead up to coming on the show.
And a little bit of background to it. So Arthur Fleck lives with his mother in this public housing complex. He's got mental conditions. He works as a clown in this bizarre rent-a-clown service where he'll be...
It's like an advertising service.
So both advertising, because there's an early scene where he's holding a sign outside of a music store, and then later on he's performing at a children's hospital.
I kind of assumed that was just I don't know that was a really paid gig. I think that was something he just did.
No, I think the indication was that it was a paid gig because the conversation he has with his boss about it afterwards, after it goes south, which I won't get into, at least right now. But yeah, there's that Rent-A-Clown agency is supposed to parallel the taxi agency in Taxi.
And I haven't seen the other movies
Driver
that you're saying that it evokes. Mm-hmm. So I'm coming at it just purely from this perspective. And we're going to go back up into some of this later on, but I wanted to talk specifically about that scene on the Live with Murray Franklin. As in the lead up to it, Arthur is going through a little bit more and more of his breakdown, and he's rehearsing for the show because he's got this mental condition, and so he's rehearsing so that he's prepared so that he won't have issues with his mental condition, which he just laughs.
Yeah, he laughs uncontrollably. And to set some context to why he's being invited on the show is there's this comedy club he goes to called Pojo's, which is a reference to Jeffrey Dahmer. I believe that was the name of the clown that he performed as.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
And one thing I caught the second time, which I didn't catch the first time, is they explain why it was on video. Because when Arthur's waiting to go up on stage, he is watching a TV which is showing the comic that's on before him. So they record all of the live stand-up at this club. He goes up, he completely bombs because he doesn't really understand humor as much as he wants to be.
Well, it's not even just that. It's also his condition. He laughs uncontrollably.
Yeah.
It doesn't reflect his real emotions. So when he gets up there and he's nervous... Yeah. He can't control his nerves, and it comes out in him laughing uncontrollably.
But even without that, his jokes are the jokes of a man who's not all there.
Yeah,
it's humor that's maybe funny if you have his mental condition.
Yeah,
but just seems odd if you don't.
Yeah, and he's been an aspiring comedian. That's what he wants to be as a stand-up comic.
But a clip of this ends up circulating as kind of a pre-viral video.
Yeah, and it's shown on the Live with Murray Franklin. And the response that they get from having shown that clip is what leads them to invite Arthur onto the show. Mm-hmm. But as Arthur's rehearsing for the show so that he can avoid laughing the way he does in the clip, so earlier in the movie he's been given a gun and he's playing around with the gun and he rehearses committing suicide on the show repeatedly. In the actual scene in the TV show, he's having his conversation with Murray Franklin. It's not going the way that he expects. He tries telling a knock-knock joke and stands up and shoots and kills Murray Franklin.
Yeah.
I almost think that it would have worked better had he attempts the suicide, had he, done what he'd rehearsed, puts the gun underneath his chin, pulls the trigger, and it just didn't fire. Misfire, the round doesn't go off for whatever reason.
But they wanted to make him more aggressive, and that wouldn't have...
Well, it fits in with what he did earlier in the movie. Yeah. I think you could have done more with his unraveling had you done it as a failed suicide as opposed to him just murdering somebody else.
I actually thought that worked. For me, that worked.
Oh, it works.
Because
I think it would have been
better.
That
was the plan. He went in with the plan, but basically Murray Franklin pissed him off.
Yeah.
And so he hadn't really... It was almost a reflex action.
Yeah.
And that scene is one of the more memorable scenes in the film, and it is shocking, even on second viewing.
Yeah.
It just... There's a great tension and build up to it because he's come on in his full clown makeup. He's asked to be introduced as the Joker. He cops to killing these three men on the subway earlier in the film, which had galvanized this kind of political movement.
Yeah.
It kind of, for a lot of people in Gotham City, it symbolized their frustration. So he was on a train earlier. There were these Wall Street types, young, cocky kids that were harassing a girl, and then his laughter kind of distracted them.
Well, his condition kicks in. He starts laughing
because he gets
and
nervous.
So then they choose to pick on him,
and he ends up killing all three of them.
Well, first they physically assault him.
They do. That's true.
The other thing the other reason why I think it would have worked better as a failed suicide attempt is Murray Franklin is the first person. Well, I guess technically the second person who he kills who wasn't physically assaulting him. He also kills one of his coworkers from the clown agency, who you could say is still threatening him at the time. Murray Franklin poses no real threat to Arthur, other than to his psyche. Whereas Randall, when he kills Randall, you could imply a threat to what Randall's doing. In fact, he lets his other coworker, Gary, leave, you know, goes and unlocks the door for him. Says, you're the only person that was nice to me. But Randall is the one who's given him the gun. He's the one who's kind of set up some other things.
He gave him the gun, and then he
frames him at work.
Frames him at work for having the gun,
Yeah, and so he ends up killing Randall, but Randall's there to ask him, you know, like the cops have come and talked to Arthur, and now supposedly they want to talk to Randall. So Randall wants to know what Arthur told the police. And he's behaving in kind of an odd manner, which you could say he was threatening Arthur a little bit. But Murray Franklin, this is the first person who he kills who just, it's entirely unprovoked, other than he's just challenging what he's saying on the TV show.
So over the course of the film, Arthur kills a total of 6 people. He kills the 3 people on the subway, one of which looks suspiciously like Eric Trump. Really, it's hard to imagine that wasn't intentional.
I don't know. I'm not going to go there.
And then he kills Randall. After he kills his mother. So his mother had worked.
So let's save his mother for when we talk about his mother. I have several comments about his mother, and I'm not sure if we picked up on the same things about his mother or not.
Go ahead.
You want to go into the mother now?
No, go ahead. Go the direction you want to go with the.
Oh, I just was saying, you know, because Murray Franklin is the first person who wasn't actively threatening Arthur when he kills him. It's a different shift for the Joker, and sure, it works with what the Joker will eventually do. I think it would have worked better in the mental unraveling of Arthur Fleck had it turned into a failed suicide. Even if maybe after the failed suicide he shoots.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to have to disagree with you on that. I think going with him because the spontaneity of what he did, I think worked because he's unhinged.
I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying I think that the failed suicide would have worked better.
I don't think doing the attempted suicide first, because I think that would have been unnecessarily sympathetic to him. They've already established to an extent. You have some sympathy for Arthur.
Yeah.
He expends it, but you kind of see where he's coming from, and I think there wasn't a need at that point in the story to do a kind of a poor Arthur moment again. He had crossed that line.
I don't think it would have been a poor Arthur moment. I think it just would have played into his mental unraveling, because throughout the movie there's a mental unraveling that's occurring. I think we agree on that. There's this unraveling that's occurring, and it just plays into that. And I think clearly he snaps at some point in the movie, and it's while he's on the show. Even if he'd shot Murray Franklin afterwards, I think it still works. I think it works either way. I just think for me, doing what he'd rehearsed, I think would have worked slightly better. That's all I have to say about that. But that's dark. So probably one of the most beautiful parts of this movie, like genuinely beautiful parts of this movie, is he has this imagined relationship with a neighbor. He, at various times, and at first it's not perfectly clear that he's imagining this relationship.
It's something that I think I kind of suspected the first time I was watching it, because I've seen movies kind of like this before, and their relationship didn't really seem to make a lot of sense. Like, all of a sudden, why is she, she just found out that he stalked her all day.
She would have been extremely sympathetic.
And now it's like, okay, I guess I'll go out with you if you want to go out, even though you just stalked me all day.
Well, it comes across
in the way that clear on the second viewing.
Well, the way it comes across in his imagining, she thinks he's kind of funny. So they meet on the elevator. He holds the elevator for the neighbor and her daughter, and they're having some banter back and forth as the elevator goes up and breaks down and keeps going. And she mocks shooting herself with her fingers, and they have some genuinely nice interaction. And then Arthur from there imagines this interaction growing. So he follows her to work one day, and in his mind, she says, "Oh, did you follow me? I wish you'd, robbed the store or whatever." And he jokes, "I've got a gun." He's not actually joking. She thinks he's joking and thinks that he's cute. And so he tells her, "Oh, I'm going to be doing some stand-up comedy. Maybe you could come and see it sometime." It's entirely plausible how it starts. Mm-hmm. And the way that they show it developing from there is theoretically plausible in the way that he imagines it, but it's entirely imagined.
Yeah, just briefly, the name of this neighbor is Sophie Drummond. She is played by an actress named Zazie Beetz, who also played Domino in Deadpool 2.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And Wikipedia says she was born in Germany, which is interesting. She's a black woman. One thing that has been commented on in this film is, really with the exception of his mother, all of the interactions that Arthur has with women in this film are with black women. Sophie, and then his therapist,
yeah,
and then the woman on the bus. I don't know if that's intentional or if that's supposed to say something specifically, but it's noticeable.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's intentional either. But this relationship that he imagines with the neighbor, had it been real, it's just a genuinely beautiful part of the story, but it's entirely imagined.
Yeah. We should talk a little bit about Frances Conroy, who plays his mother. So during the course of the breakdown that Arthur is having, his mother has been going on about writing to Thomas Wayne, for whom she worked as a maid at the Wayne family estate 30 years or more earlier. And Thomas Wayne has starting to consider, and over the course of the film, announces that he is running for mayor of Gotham because the city's become so royally dysfunctional that he feels that he's one of, if not the only person that can go in and save the city, which is some interesting foreshadowing for Batman and this whole Wayne family ethos of only we save the city. And I think there's a little bit of that with Thomas Wayne in some of the earlier versions, that he was the guy that was going to save the city.
In earlier versions, he certainly comes across as quite the philanthropic man.
Here he's kind of different. I'm blanking the name of the actor who plays him. He's a little... Brett Cullen. He's a little bit of a jerk.
Yeah.
He's not an irredeemable jerk, but he's rich and entitled.
Well, and you don't see any of the philanthropic part that doesn't come through.
Mm.
I mean,
it's hinted at, but it's you don't really see.
It's hinted at, but it's hinted at
through Frances Conroy, through the mother.
Well, not only that, but the way that this uprising within the city goes. If he was really being as philanthropic as he seems in other versions of the film, much of the city would have been a lot more sympathetic to him. They wouldn't have had the protest, at that benefit thing that he goes to. Mm. If he was that philanthropic, the protest wouldn't have been outside his benefit.
Mm. But anyway, Frances Conroy, Arthur's mother, is writing letters to Thomas Wayne and is waiting every day for a response. She goes on and on about how he's a good man and that if he knew how they were living, he'd step in and help them. And she keeps not getting a response. And his mother's mostly confined to the apartment. So one of his jobs, Arthur's jobs, is to go and check the mail every day. And there's just nothing ever comes from Thomas Wayne. And she keeps writing letters.
Nothing comes, period.
Yeah. And at a certain point, he decides, I'm just going to check out this letter to see what it is my mom's writing him. So opens the letter, the most recent letter, and in the letter, his mother says that Arthur's his son. Like, she says it in such a way that, like, we both know that this is true. This is your son. Your son needs help. I need help. And so Arthur confronts his mother about this, says, is this true? Is this true? The implication is she says it is. She's hiding in a bathroom for a while. But anyway...
Well, he's gotten angry, and so she goes into the bathroom to hide from him until he calms down, and they have this conversation through the door.
So Arthur becomes convinced that his mother's telling the truth, that Thomas Wayne is his father. So he goes to Wayne Manor to try to meet with him. Is not successful. Does see a young Bruce Wayne outside. One thing I thought was interesting, and I think you talked about it a little bit, about some issues... I think this was mostly outside the recording, some issues with the time frames on this, which we can go back into. But Bruce Wayne is probably around 10.
Yeah.
His father looks like he's close to 60. So it seems kind of odd for somebody that age to have a child that young when his wife seems to be fairly close to his age. It's not like a younger second wife situation.
Yeah, and that's precisely kind of where we were talking about this was... It wouldn't be that abnormal for someone that age to have a child. It's abnormal for the husband and wife to both seem to be that age and have a
Yeah.
child that appears to be that young.
Especially if you're saying this guy's a big hotshot. Like,
Yeah.
It would have been easier for me to buy him having a younger, presumably second wife, than the woman that they cast. But that's beside the point. So Arthur goes to Wayne Manor, has a little interaction with a young Bruce Wayne, is shooed away by Alfred. I kind of like the guy who played Alfred in this. It seemed like a slightly different take because he's younger
Yeah.
than we're used to seeing him.
I honestly didn't connect that was Alfred.
Yeah. So he goes away, and later Thomas Wayne is having a benefit at some museum, and they're showing the early 1930s Chaplin film. I want to say it's from 31, City Lights. And so there's a moment where the Joker watches one of the great clowns of all time. It's kind of
Well, he starts to mimic the dance.
he starts to
scene.
mimic the dance. Yeah, and he does dancing's kind of a thing he does throughout the film.
Yeah.
But anyway, has a confrontation with Thomas Wayne in the restroom at this event, and Thomas Wayne says, "Yeah, I did know your mother, but we were never romantically involved. She's crazy, and you're not even her kid.
You're adopted.
You're adopted." And later, Arthur goes to Arkham Asylum to dig up records on his mother and finds this is true. He is adopted. His mother was institutionalized for a time because she allowed a boyfriend to abuse because she was not right mentally, but also because she allowed a boyfriend to abuse Arthur, who at one point was literally tied to a radiator,
Chained to a radiator.
and beaten, and also beaten around the head. He apparently does not remember this.
He has no recollection of it. And there's various times in the movie where he's carrying around this card. Like there's the scene on the bus where he's making faces that make a small child laugh, and the mother turns around and is like, "Leave my kid alone." And he starts laughing, and she's like, "What's wrong with you?" And he hands her this card that says, "I have this condition that makes me laugh. My laughing doesn't reflect my real emotions." And it says, flip it over, and on the back side it says, "This is a result of," I forget what the alternative is,
Yeah.
but
But
either
it
a
could
head
be-
injury or another
Yeah,
psychosis,
and to please return the card to the bearer.
Yeah.
This is something that's just a part of Arthur's life, having to deal with these inappropriate fits of laughter, and the card is just the most efficient way to explain to strangers what's going
But
on.
we're now making the connection that this is a result of the abuse that he
head
suffers
damage, yeah.
because of things that his mother does.
But he gets so upset about this that eventually he kills his mother. His mother had
A stroke.
a stroke earlier
Is
in
in
the
the
film.
hospital.
Actually, the stroke was apparently triggered by police officers stopping by because
To ask questions about Arthur.
the death of those men on the subway, there was a witness that saw that it was a clown, but not a lot of description beyond that. And so obviously a place you'd look is the Rent-A-Clown agency, and this particular Rent-A-Clown was fired because he had a gun like the day that this happened. It's like,
Yep.
this is somebody we really need to look into. But she ends up in the hospital. Arthur smothers her with Bello.
This whole relationship with the mother is an entirely disturbing relationship.
And I want to say briefly, Frances Conroy. I love Frances Conroy.
Yeah.
She was the mother on 6 Feet Under. She's a regular member of the Little Stock Company on American Horror Story, where she plays a different character most seasons. She's great. She's
Yeah.
great in this. And she's great at playing a woman who's crazy.
Yeah.
But functional enough crazy that you're just, it's not that concerning until you find out the backstory.
Yeah, and as you learn some of the backstory, this relationship becomes more and more disturbing. They live together, but not only do they live together, it's implied that they share a bed.
I didn't pick that up.
So
It's true you never see his room.
you never see his room. He's either in the living room or in her room. So when the Murray Franklin show comes on, she tells him, "Come get in bed next to me." So he gets in bed next
No,
to
it
her.
says get to bed, but I don't think she says next to me. But yeah, you could
But
read
well, he comes
that.
and sits next to her, and then there's also the scene later on in the movie where he wakes up in bed and he's grabbing her pillow and smelling it,
No, I thought that was supposed to be.
and the gun's on the bedside table.
I thought that was because he was fantasizing that he was with the neighbor and that he thought he was smelling the neighbor's scent. It's a little vague.
I mean, maybe there is one of those fantasy scenes going on, but he grabs the pillow and smells it. Even if he is fantasizing that it's the neighbor girl and he's sniffing the pillow, there's obviously, kind of an Oedipus complex he's never gotten past with his mother.
Yeah.
Not that act on it or anything, but he's her caretaker. She's basically homebound. But even after,
Well, they're very close. They dance. He bathes her in one scene, which is a little odd. Yeah, there's a bit of this. I didn't read it as being anything
well, you read
really
between
untowards, but just being weird.
you read between the lines, and she's had this breakdown. She's been committed in Arkham Asylum because she allowed this abuse to occur. Obviously, at some point she got out, and how did they reunite? At some point, her custody must have been restored, or later in his life, they met again and they've rekindled this
Yeah.
relationship. But in essence, the abuse is being perpetuated
Yeah.
in the conditions that they're
yeah.
in, and these types of things, and her lying to him. The abuse is just being perpetuated. I mean, the story of Arthur really is just a sad story.
Yeah.
That relationship with the mother, with that ongoing abuse, it's just really weird, and it's really disturbing.
Yeah, and if anything, it's an element of the plot that isn't explored much in depth. It
Well-
leaves a lot for you to just kind of surmise.
Well, and there's even that moment very early in the film where his mom puts him down. Like, he's talking about he's got a opportunity to do the stand-up comedy, and she's like, well, don't you have to be funny to be a comedian?
Yeah.
I mean, she's doing things to keep him there. Like I said, it's ongoing abuse. She's,
kind of mental, emotional abuse.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to talk about related to this film is, and we had kind of a conversation about this before we started recording, this film kind of screws up the timeline of the Batman story. And I didn't really love that. It kind of messes up that timeline. I mean, if Gotham is this messed up and this much of a powder keg and ignites that easily, I mean, there's clearly, riots and things happening in the street at the end of this film. If Gotham's that messed up and stays that messed up for the 15, 20 years we've got to wait for Bruce Wayne to grow up and become Batman, Gotham is not a city that could exist in that timeline anymore.
Well, I think,
Not functionally in the way we see it in the films.
so the parallels here, of course, to New York City. And New York City was really bad from the 60s into the 80s, arguably even the early 90s. So I don't think it's inconceivable that things get better for a while and then go bad again.
Well, so the reason the city supposedly is held together was the philanthropic nature of Thomas Wayne. He's done so much for the city that's helped the disadvantaged in the city. We're talking about in the Batman timeline. He's done so much for the city and helped the less fortunate, through his philanthropic efforts, that's part of what helps keep the city from devolving into the crime, into the criminal state that we see in the Batman movies. But if it's such a powder keg and it's ignited by Arthur's actions as the Joker, there's no way that it exists in that condition. And we never saw any of Thomas Wayne's philanthropic efforts in this film. They don't seem to exist in this film. There's no way that without those philanthropic efforts, this city doesn't just tear itself apart in the next.
Well, I think they're there. They're hinted at least the mother talks about them or implies that they're there, but they're probably not on the scale that they might be in some of the other Batman storylines or on the scale that the city would legitimately need.
Yeah. And so how does this city continue to function for the next 10, 15 years until Bruce Wayne becomes Batman?
Well, this film was always intended to be a standalone and not really set up, though apparently there's talks now about doing more with it because it was so successful. This movie has made over $1 billion.
Oh, yeah. But they tie together so much of the imagery. I mean, they have the killing of the Waynes with Bruce Wayne in the alley. It's missing a line, which I would have loved to have heard that, but I can handle it not being there.
You ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight?
Exactly. They show it, they're showing the circumstances that tie it to the Batman franchise, but to me that was a little bit of a disconnect. It's a minor complaint about the film, but that's my only other minor complaint about this film.
So one of the films on the marquee at the theater is Mask of Zorro, which I don't think there was a real Mask of Zorro film released theatrically in 1981, but that is a reference that goes back to the original comics in which it was a Zorro film that the Waynes had left when Bruce's parents were killed.
So, final thoughts. How would you rate this film?
A lot of what I say, I think maybe comes across that I'm putting it down. But even as an imitation of these better films, it still makes it one of the better films of the year. So I have some issues with it. I could not quite overcome the sense that this was derivative repackaging, and not entirely comfortable with overlaying a Scorsese-type character study onto the Batman franchise like this. But I would still probably give it 3.5 stars.
I'm about the same. I would say 3.5 stars on the 4-star scale. On the 10-star scale, I think I'd give this a solid 8.
Probably a 7 for me.
Yeah, I'm an 8 on the 10-star scale. Now, I should say, despite the high rating of this film, I would be very careful about who I'd recommend this film to. It is extremely dark.
Yeah, it's very
I
violent.
don't think any young children should see this at all, period.
And actually, that ties very briefly. There was some concern about this film glamorizing or, in one sense or another, promoting vigilante shootings. There was a concern about how this film could inspire mass shootings, which, given the previous Aurora shooting and given what this whole film is about, which is the a white man going unhinged and, in this case, not shooting up. Well, he does shoot people up. But there's a level in which this can be read as a story about a figurative mass shooting.
Yeah.
And how it comes about.
Well, and honestly, like, if I knew someone was in a deep, in a serious depression, I would not tell them to go see this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a dark, dark movie. It is beautifully dark, and it's a beautiful film, but it's dark.
Does it make you curious about seeing some of the films that it was inspired by?
Yeah, I mean, those are on my list anyway. Taxi Driver, I wanted to see. I don't remember what the other one you
Human
mentioned.
comedy.
I'm not real familiar with that one. I'll probably add to my list, but Taxi Driver's been on my list for a little while. I suspect it's one I'll see sometime in the coming year.
Also Network, which is not a Scorsese film, but it's a film about violence and television in the 1970s. But yeah, I have conflicted feelings about it, but on the whole, I'd say for audiences for whom it would be appropriate viewing material, not young children, obviously, I would recommend it.
Me too.
Well, this is Nate.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Rob and Nate, or was, Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.